Answering the question how much does Azure cost is kind of like answering the question how long is a rope, because it all depends. You can have an Azure environment that costs nothing, and you can have an Azure environment that costs all the money in the world. The sky is quite literally the limit here, or should I say the clouds the limit. Instead, I wanted to shift the focus on to what are the main cost drivers in Azure, because some of them are quite obvious, but some of them are something you might not think about. By the way, I do stream things like this and other stuff from time to time over at my Twitch channel. Links to that down below, so catch me there. Now, over to the costs. If you ask someone what drives cost in Azure or any other cloud, they would probably guess compute, because that's the most logical, obvious thing there is. And in most cases, that's the main cost drivers. But what is compute in this sense? If you're running your virtual machines in Azure, it's quite obvious. It's basically the same CPU and the RAM. And the more you have, the more you pay. But you also pay for the amount of time that you use them. And although the prices are usually shown per hour, it's actually usually calculated per second. So that means if you're running a really expensive virtual machine in Azure, every second literally counts. So do remember to shut down your virtual machines if you're not using them, and try to do so from the Azure side of things and not within the guest operating system. Otherwise, you would still be paying for the compute. Unless, of course, you have reserved instances which cover your computing needs, but I guess that's kind of the topic for the Azure reduction cost video that will be coming, so get subscribed for that. This way of paying for compute is used for other services in Azure as well, besides virtual machines. For example, if you purchase app services, those are based on app service plans, which dedicate a certain amount of CPU and RAM for your workload, and also some of the SQL Server as service tiers use the same way of paying for compute. Which takes me to a specific type of compute measuring method called DTU, or Database Transaction Unit. Now, this is a little bit harder to wrap your head around, but basically the idea that is that a DTU is consisting of a little bit of CPU, a little bit of RAM, and some reads and some writes. So you can purchase a database as a service and reserve a set amount of DTUs, and if you then exceed that amount of DTUs, then your workload is throttled, so you will experience a lot slower performance and probably even some timeouts because of that. So this is something I can't really recommend. Just stick to the vCore or check out serverless. All of the services I've mentioned up until now also have one more thing in common, that is license. Now, this depends on the configuration that you do for your services, of course. For example, if you're running a Linux virtual machine, you will not be paying a license. But for Windows-based virtual machines and SQL databases as a service, there will be a license part for example, the Windows operating system or, well, SQL Server. You can avoid these costs, of course, if you have your licenses already with software assurance, or if you are running your workloads on dev test subscriptions, like I mentioned in my previous video. But I guess this is also a topic for that cost reduction video that's coming. Switching over to storage, there are a couple of cost drivers there as well. One of them is, of course, the size of the storage, but depending on your configuration of virtual machine disks, you either pay for outbound transfers or IOPS and outbound transfers. Premium SSDs will include IOPS in the cost, so you will pay for outbound transfers, while standard SSDs and standard HDDs will have you pay for both storage size, IOPS, and outbound transfers. And for storage accounts, you have a couple of more options as well, and therefore also a couple of more cost drivers. You have performance, which range from standard or premium, and you have access tiers which range from archive up until hot. And you might be tempted to select archive for your storage and think that, well, it'll be fine. I can live with the lower performance. I'll save cost on storage. But most probably you will not, because the lower you go on the access tiers, the less you pay for the storage, but the more you pay for the access. So while hot has a pretty high storage cost, it actually has quite a low access cost. And for archive, which has the lowest cost for storage, it also has the highest cost for access, and you will actually also have to pay an early deletion charge if you delete files in the archive tier that's not been there for 180 days. Another thing that drives cost with storage accounts is the availability. Now you can select availability from the lowest tier, which is LRS, or locally redundant storage. This makes sure that your data is saved at least 3 times within the same data center. And for reference, an Azure region is usually consisting of at least 3 data centers. And 3 copies may seem like a lot, but you would want something more, or your data spread over more data centers, and at least for your production workloads. I'll cover these availability tiers more in a separate video, so I will not go into detail here, but availability is for sure one of the things that drives cost within storage accounts. The last cost driver I want to mention here is actually regions. And that might be something you don't think about, because usually you select the Azure region that is physically closest to you or your users, and that has the services you need. But the prices for Azure services actually vary a lot between regions. So for your production workloads, of course, you select the region that is closest to your users, but you might want to consider demo or test environments being placed in regions that are cheaper, because you can actually save about 40% on this. There are, of course, many cost drivers that I haven't mentioned here at all, but these are kind of the main ones, the first ones you will encounter as you start your Azure journey. So I hope this video provided some insights and that you learned something. If so, please do remember to subscribe, like, and all the good stuff. And yeah, see you later.